A poor maid stands frozen on stage, her hands trembling as a billionaire raises his paddle. "You paid for me! Now do it!" she cries, her voice echoing through the silent crowd. Everyone gasps. They think he bought her for himself. But what happens next shocks the entire room. Instead of humiliation, he takes her into his mansion. But not for what the world expects. He needs her to care for his blind mother. And in that cold, empty house, something impossible begins to happen. The woman he bought starts healing the man who thought money could buy everything. But when tragedy strikes and the truth about his past comes to light, her faith is tested. Because sometimes the price of love is forgiveness. Now the world is watching. Will he prove that grace can't be bought? Or will pride destroy the only person who ever saw his heart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The church hall glowed with strings of yellow lights, their soft flicker warming the wooden walls. The air buzzed with laughter, perfume, and the clinking of glasses. Men in tailored suits and women in glittering dresses filled the room, holding their numbered paddles like trophies. The event was called Maid for a Day charity auction, meant to raise money for a women's shelter on the south side of Atlanta. Riley Caldwell stood behind the curtain, smoothing the hem of her plain blue dress. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't new. But it was clean and ironed, thanks to her friend Carla, who had stayed up late pressing it after work. Riley's heart pounded hard, almost painfully. She pressed her hand to her chest and whispered a prayer. "Lord, let this be enough to help Mama." Her mother's hospital bills were more than she could handle. The insurance had stopped covering treatment 2 months ago, and Riley's jobs, cleaning homes during the day and wiping tables at a diner at night, barely paid rent. When she heard the church was hosting this event, she had hesitated. Being auctioned off, even for charity, didn't feel right, but desperation could make a person brave. "Number 12, you're up next," the host whispered, peeking behind the curtain. "You ready, sweetheart?" Riley nodded, even though her knees shook. The crowd's applause for the previous contestant faded, and the host stepped up to the microphone. "Next, we have a very special volunteer," he said in his cheerful, practiced tone. "Riley Caldwell. She's hard-working, kind, and all proceeds from her auction will go directly to the St. Anne's shelter." Riley took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The light hit her face, bright and blinding. She blinked quickly, forcing a smile. The crowd's murmurs grew. Some whispered kindly. Others chuckled. Her blue dress looked out of place among the gowns and suits, but she stood tall anyway. The bidding started low, $50, then $100. She smiled shyly each time someone lifted a paddle. The host joked, kept the room laughing, and for a moment it didn't feel so bad. Then a voice came from the back, calm, deep, and sharp as a knife. $10,000. The laughter stopped. Heads turned. Even the host froze, blinking into the crowd. At the very back of the room sat a man in a dark suit, his tie slightly loosened, his gaze unreadable. The spotlight didn't reach him, but everyone knew who he was. George Rowe, billionaire real estate mogul, the man who built half of Atlanta's skyline and never smiled doing it. 10,000? The host stammered. "Sir, that's very generous." George said nothing. He just tapped his paddle once, signaling he meant it. "Sold," the host said, half in shock. "To Mr. George Rowe." The room broke into whispers. Some were impressed, others disbelieving. Riley's hands shook. She hadn't expected to raise more than a few $100s. 10,000? That was more money than she had seen in her entire life. But the silence that followed made her stomach twist. The looks from the crowd weren't kind anymore. They were curious, some even cruel. She could almost hear what they were thinking. What would a billionaire want with a maid? Riley swallowed hard. She stepped off the stage, holding her small clutch close to her chest. As she passed the tables, someone muttered, "Guess money buys everything." She turned sharply, her heart pounding. "You paid for me," she said suddenly, her voice trembling but clear. "Now do it." Gasps spread through the room like wildfire. Her words had come out wrong. She meant, "Let me work. Let me earn it." But that wasn't how it sounded. Faces turned, some shocked, others smirking. George rose slowly from his chair. He wasn't smiling or angry, just calm, steady, and unreadable. "Monday morning?" he said simply. "My driver will pick you up." And then he left, just like that. The crowd broke into uneasy laughter. The host tried to joke about it, but Riley stood frozen, humiliated. Carla rushed to her side, whispering, "Let's go, don't listen to them." Outside, the air was cool and smelled like rain. Riley pulled her thin coat tight around her shoulders. Her mind raced. $10,000. If the church kept its promise, that money could help the shelter and pay for one of her mother's treatments. But what had she just agreed to? That night, she couldn't sleep. The sound of her mother's weak breathing filled the small apartment. Riley sat beside the bed, brushing the older woman's graying curls off her forehead. "Mama," she whispered, "I think I made a fool of myself." Her mother stirred faintly. "If you did it with love in your heart, baby, it ain't foolish," she murmured. Riley smiled faintly. "He's rich, Mama. Like, rich. I don't even know what he wants." Her mother's weak hand found hers. "Maybe God does," she said softly. "Sometimes he uses the strangest people to show us his plan." Riley didn't answer. She just held her mother's hand until dawn broke through the window. Monday came faster than she expected. The city was grey with early morning fog as a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment building. Riley stood by the curb, a single duffel bag at her feet. Her heart felt like a drum in her chest. The driver, a polite man in a suit, opened the door without a word. "Miss Caldwell?" he asked. She nodded, sliding in carefully. The leather seats were soft, the air faintly scented with cologne. As the car moved through the city, she stared out the window at the buildings rising higher and higher. When they stopped, she could hardly believe her eyes. The mansion stood on Peachtree Hill, tall and elegant, surrounded by perfectly trimmed hedges and gates that gleamed in the sunlight. She hesitated before stepping out. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and grey-streaked hair, smiled warmly. "You must be Riley," she said. "I'm Skylar. Come in, dear. Mr. Rowe's expecting you." The inside of the house was like another world. Polished floors, quiet halls, and light pouring in through tall windows. But it felt cold, too. The kind of cold that came from silence, not temperature. George appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in a grey suit. "You're on time," he said simply. "Yes, sir," Riley replied, her voice small. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded toward the back of the hall. "You'll be caring for my mother. She's blind and needs someone patient. Skylar will show you around." That was it. No small talk, no smile, just orders. Riley followed Skylar through the house, still taking in the details. The spotless furniture, the soft ticking of a clock, the faint smell of lemon polish. "Don't mind him," Skylar said kindly. "He's a good man under all that marble." Riley gave a small smile. "He doesn't seem too happy." Skylar sighed. "He used to be once." When Riley met George's mother later that afternoon, she was sitting in a sunlit room, surrounded by potted plants. Her hair was silver, her eyes cloudy but kind. "You must be the new girl," she said with a smile. "Yes, Ma'am," Riley said softly. Would you read to me? Riley hesitated, then picked up the Bible lying open on the table. She began to read, her voice calm and steady. When she finished, the older woman smiled. You sound like peace, she said. That night, after helping Skylar prepare dinner, Riley sat by her window, watching the city lights shimmer below. Somewhere in that big house, George Rowe was probably in his office, still working. She whispered again, Lord, if you brought me here for a reason, please, help me find it. Morning light slid across the hardwood floors like a quiet river. Riley woke to the soft glow that touched the far edge of the guest room, the curtains moving with a small breath of air from a vent. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The sheets felt too smooth. The room was too still. Then memory rose like a tide. The auction, the long car ride, the tall house on the hill, and the old woman with the gentle voice who asked her to read scripture at sunset. Riley sat up, pressed her palms together and whispered, Thank you for a new day. She brushed her hair, tied it back with a plain band, and smoothed the skirt of her simple grey dress. Her mother would have told her to stand tall and smile. So she did. The hallway outside her door smelled faintly of lemon and clean linen. From somewhere below came the soft clink of cups and the muted rhythm of footsteps on tile. She followed the sound to the kitchen. Skylar stood at the stove with an apron tied neat around her waist, stirring a pan while steam drifted up like a small white cloud. The older woman looked over her shoulder and smiled in a way that warmed the room more than the stove did. Morning, honey. Skylar said, You're right on time. I like that. I was worried I'd be late. Riley replied, I don't know the routine yet. You'll know it by heart by Friday. Skylar slid eggs onto a plate, added sliced fruit, and set the dish on the counter. Mrs. Rowe likes oatmeal and berries, tea with honey, and the psalm of the day. We let her choose the psalm. She says God's got a menu for every mood. She let out a soft laugh. She's right. Riley smiled. I'll try to keep up. You'll do more than that. Skylar passed her a tray. You'll help this house breathe again. They carried breakfast up the wide stairs. At the top, the world held its breath. The long runner rug, the heavy frames on the walls, the air that sounded like a hush in a church. Skylar tapped lightly on a door. Good morning, Mrs. Rowe, she called. Breakfast and a helper who reads like sunshine. A thin voice on the other side replied, Send the sunshine in. They entered the room. It had tall windows, white curtains, and plants along the sill, a little jungle of green. Mrs. Rowe sat in a chair by the light. Her hair lay in a silver wave, and her cloudy eyes pointed toward the window like she could still see the day if she tried hard enough. Riley set the tray on a small table and moved to kneel beside her. Good morning, Mom. Is that you, dear? Mrs. Rowe's hand moved in the air, looking for a familiar shape. It's me, Mom. Riley. May I hold your hand while you eat? You may hold my hand even when I'm not eating. Her thin fingers found Riley's and settled there, light but sure. What does the sky look like? Blue and soft. Riley answered, like a quilt just washed and hung to dry. Good. Mrs. Rowe said, I'll wear that in my mind. Skylar poured tea and adjusted the pillow behind the older woman's back. Psalm? Psalm 27. Mrs. Rowe said, It is brave. Riley opened the leather-bound Bible on the table. The pages felt thin, like wings. She read, slow and steady, her voice filling the room without pushing against it. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? As she read, the sunlight slid a little higher up the curtains. She finished, closed the book, and looked up to find Mrs. Rowe smiling. You do sound like peace, the old woman said again, as if the words were a blessing she wanted to repeat. A movement in the doorway caught Riley's eye. George stood there in a crisp blue suit, his tie straight, his expression set like a guard at a gate. He had the look of a man who lived inside his schedule, not beside it. "Mother," he said, voice even. "Do you need anything else?" "I have tea, scripture, and a kind hand." Mrs. Rowe replied, "I am rich." Something flickered across his face, there and gone. He nodded once. "I'll be late tonight." Then he turned his gaze to Riley, not unkind, not kind either. "Skylar will show you the house routines. If you need supplies for Mother, ask the office. Security will clear deliveries." "Thank you, sir," Riley said. He left without another word. The room seemed to exhale when he was gone. Skylar touched Riley's shoulder. "Come along, and I'll put the house in your hands." They walked the halls. Skylar explained how laundry moved from the upstairs chute to the downstairs room, how fresh flowers came on Wednesdays, how the gardener left a basket of herbs at the back door every Monday and Friday. "We keep the kitchen simple," she said. "Healthy, fresh, not fussy. He eats quick, she eats slow. You'll learn the difference between fuel and food." "Fuel and food," Riley repeated with a small grin. "I like that." They passed a door at the end of a quieter hall. "Office," Skylar said. "That's where Mr. Rowe does his thinking. If the door is closed, let it stay closed." She paused. "If it's open and he looks lost, ask if he wants coffee. He won't say he needs it, he'll say yes." "I understand." Skylar opened a linen closet. Rows of sheets, towels, and blankets sat like soldiers at attention. She handed Riley a set of cream sheets. "Guest room 3 needs a refresh. Start there. After lunch, we'll see about the garden." "The garden?" Skylar's eyes brightened. "It's out back. No one has loved it in a while. That's a shame. It used to sing." After making up the guest room, dusting frames, straightening books, and quick wiping the banister, little touches that made a place feel tended, Riley returned to the kitchen. She washed her hands at the sink and looked out the window. A slice of yard stretched beyond the patio, then a low brick wall, and beyond that a tangle of bushes and rose canes that had forgotten they were roses. "Lunch?" Skylar asked from the fridge. "Something light for Mrs. Rowe." Riley answered. "I can bring it up." Skylar packed a tray, chicken soup in a shallow bowl, soft bread, cut pears, and a small vase with one white daisy. "Never forget the flour. A small good thing makes big hard things softer." Riley carried the tray upstairs. Mrs. Rowe's room now held a soft radio playing an old hymn. The older woman turned her head at the sound of footsteps. "I brought you soup," Riley said, setting the tray down. "And a daisy that refused to be ordinary today. Let me smell its stubbornness," Mrs. Rowe said. She breathed in the flower's tiny sweetness and smiled. "Ah, yes, that is a small good thing." They talked while she ate. Not about money or illness, about the names of flowers Mrs. Rowe remembered from her childhood, about a picnic she once had by a lake, where dragonflies landed on her toes. When the bowl was empty, Riley dabbed the woman's mouth, set the tray aside, and read a paragraph from a worn novel on the table. The scene held a simple joy, children running through sprinklers in summer. Mrs. Rowe laughed once, low and short, like a bell that had been asleep. "I think you brought summer into February," she said. By late afternoon, when the house grew quiet in that way that big houses do, Riley stepped outside through the kitchen door. The air held a little bite, but the sun did its best to soften it. She crossed the patio and walked to the garden. The path was edged with bricks half sunk by time. The roses had grown wild and threw thin arms in all directions. The dirt wore a hard coat, but the bones of beauty were still there, the curve of a bed, the promise of a corner meant for sitting, the old iron bench beneath the maple. Riley knelt and pressed her fingers to the soil. "We can do this," she said, like she was talking to a friend who needed courage. She worked by instinct. She clipped dead stems, gathered broken branches, and freed a rose cane caught under itself. She tugged gently, as if waking a sleeping child. Under the top crust of dry dirt, the earth felt damp and cool. A worm turned and retreated, which, in a garden, was good news. Her breath settled. The quiet wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. Somewhere deep in the house, a door opened and closed. She kept trimming, kept listening to the birds that dared each other to sing. Footsteps walked across the patio. She did not turn right away. She wanted to finish the branch in her hand. When she sat back, she found George standing a few paces away. He looked out of place among leaves and daylight. The suit fit him like a uniform he didn't take off. "You garden," he said, not a question. "I try," she answered, and rose to brush dirt from her knees. "If you listen, plants tell you what they need." "What do they need?" "Air, light, water, patience." She smiled a little. "People aren't that different." He stared at the rose bush. "No one cared for this since my wife." His voice dropped on the last word, like it weighed more than the others. He blinked, and the guard came back to his face. "Let the yard crew handle it." "I don't mind," she said. "It helps me breathe." He seemed to consider this. "Fine." He adjusted his cuff, then paused. "Do you paint as well?" He nodded at the faint smear of green on her wrist, left by a leaf. Her cheeks warmed. "Sometimes. I draw more than I paint. It doesn't cost much to draw." "Skylar will find supplies," he said. "If it helps you. Breathe." "That's kind." Her words came out careful. She did not want to say too much or too little. "Thank you." He nodded once. It could have been a goodbye or a truce. He turned and walked back across the patio, down the hall, into the house's cool shadow. The screen door clicked behind him. The roses listened to the quiet again. Near 4 o'clock, Skylar called from the kitchen door. "Tea time, dear, for the both of you." She brought a tray with 2 mugs, lemon slices, and a plate of shortbread. They sat on the patio steps, their knees side by side like old friends, even though this was only day 1. "Tell me about your mama," Skylar said. Riley looked at the patch of sky between the trees. Words came like a slow stream. She loved gospel music and the way rain made the air smell. She named me after a song. She always said God listened extra close when we prayed tired. She swallowed. She's been sick a long time. Skylar reached over and squeezed her hand. Sometimes the tired prayers go the highest. They finished tea and went back inside to prepare supper. Nothing fancy. Roasted chicken, green beans with garlic, small potatoes tossed in oil and herbs. The kitchen filled with warm smells. The radio hummed. Riley's hands moved with the ease of many meals cooked in small spaces. Here the counters were long, the pans heavy-bottomed, the knives sharp. "That last bit of salt goes at the end," Skylar said, and Riley nodded. They worked like they had known each other at another time, in another kitchen, where 2 women fed a family and traded stories while the clock made slow circles. When the oven timer chimed, the front door opened. Voices murmured in the foyer, a pair of men speaking low and fast. Business words, contracts, sites, numbers. The second voice faded. A door closed, and a quiet settled like dust after a small storm. Footsteps came down the hall. George appeared in the kitchen doorway, sleeves rolled up now. Tie loosened, as if he had wrestled with a long day and only half won. "Dinner in 10, Skylar said, her tone kind but not deferential. He nodded. "Mother. Rested well. Ate all her lunch. Chose Psalm 27. Skylar's eyes softened. "She missed you." Something shifted in his expression. He did not reply. He picked up 2 glasses, filled them with water, and carried them to the dining room like a man who needed to do a useful thing with his hands. Riley took a plate upstairs to Mrs. Rowe first. Small portions, a cloth napkin. The daisy returned to the tray. She sat with the older woman while she ate, describing each bite the way you describe the sky to someone who can no longer see it. "The beans are bright and crisp," she said. "The potatoes taste like rain smells. The chicken is warm and kind." Mrs. Rowe laughed at that, a sound like metal warmed by sunlight. "Tell me what he sounds like," the old woman said suddenly. "Who?" Riley asked, though she knew. "My son." Riley thought of George's even voice in the doorway, the way it changed by 1 degree when his mother spoke. "He sounds like a stone that used to be part of a river, but got moved to a wall." Mrs. Rowe's hand paused above her plate, then resumed its small search for the next bite. "Yes," she said quietly. "That is the sound." Downstairs, the dining room table was long enough for a family reunion, but only 2 places were set. Schuyler served. Riley carried a basket of bread. They ate without fanfare. Knives clicked. Water glasses made small rings on wood. After a few minutes, George looked up. "My mother likes you," he said. "I like her," Riley replied. He cut his chicken, considered his plate, then said, "If you need time off, arrange it with Schuyler. If you need money for the work upstairs, the office handles purchase orders on Thursdays." Riley met his eyes. "I'm not here to take. I'm here to care." He stared back like he was searching for a trick and could not find one. "Good," he said at last. "Care is rare." A quiet came, but it felt less heavy now. When the meal ended, Schuyler shooed them both away from the dishes. "Go along," she told Riley. "Take Mother her evening tea. He'll pretend to work and actually think." "I heard that," George said, almost smiling. "Good," Schuyler answered. "Thinking is the first step to doing right." Riley carried a delicate cup upstairs on a small saucer. In the doorway she paused. Mrs. Rowe sat very still, her hands folded, chin tilted up like a flower leaning toward the last light. Riley set the cup down and sat beside her. "Would you like me to read again?" "Read me a prayer tonight," Mrs. Rowe said. "Something for sons who need rest." Riley read softly. When she finished, the house had grown even quieter. She helped the older woman settle into bed, straightened the blanket, and made sure the small bell lay within reach. "Tap twice if you need me," she said. "I'll come." "Twice," Mrs. Rowe repeated. "And you, tap once if you need God. He'll come." Riley smiled. I believe he already did. When she stepped into the hall, she found George there again, as if worry had raised him like an alarm and sent him to guard the threshold of a mother's sleep. He looked at the bell, at the folded hands, at the dim lamp. "She's comfortable?" Riley said. He nodded, still watching his mother's face. "She hates the dark." "She isn't in the dark," Riley answered. "She is in the light she remembers." He glanced at her then, slow and direct. Something like respect passed through his eyes, quiet as a shadow of a bird over water. "Good night," he said. "Good night, sir." Back in her room, Riley washed her hands, rubbed a sore spot on her wrist where the garden had left its mark, and sat on the edge of the bed. The day stretched behind her like a path she had walked in careful steps. She thought of her mother's breath at home, thin but steady. She thought of the rose canes, freed from their own weight. She thought of a son who stood in doorways and did not know how to come in. She took out the small sketchbook from her duffel and drew by the light of the bedside lamp. First, lines of the garden gate, then the curve of the old iron bench, then a hand, thin with soft veins, curled over a daisy stem. She shaded slowly, pressing and lifting the pencil until the page held a small truth. A soft sound drifted from the hall. Not a voice, a step. She rose, cracked her door, and looked out. The house lay in its night stillness. At the far end of the corridor, the office door stood open a few inches. Light spilled across the rug in a thin gold band. Somewhere inside, paper whispered, then stopped. Riley thought of Schuyler's advice. If the door is open and he looks lost, ask if he wants coffee. It was late for coffee. It was early for courage. She closed her door and leaned her forehead against the wood. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Let him keep his quiet. Let me keep mine." She turned off the lamp and lay down. The ceiling breathed with the slow pulse of the vent. The city's glow made a pale stripe where the curtains parted. Her body felt used in a good way, like a tool put back on its hook after a job that mattered. She folded her hands over her chest and let a simple prayer climb out of her. Take care of Mama. Take care of the woman upstairs. Take care of the man who doesn't know how to ask. Sleep came like a soft coat. She sank into it. In the office, George sat at his desk with the lamp low. A photograph leaned against a stack of files. He set his hand on it. The woman in the frame smiled in a summer dress, hair lifted by a small wind. He had not looked at the picture this long in months. He did not cry. He did not move. He only breathed and listened to the house breathe with him. Down the hall, Schuyler checked locks, set the alarm, and turned the kitchen light off, leaving only the under-cabinet glow like a nightlight for a child. She stood for a moment at the sink and rested her hands on the counter. "Thank you," she said to a room that had no ears, and to a God who did. For small good things. Outside, the garden lay under the cool night. The rose canes, newly freed, tapped each other lightly in the breeze. The old bench held its place like a faithful friend. A single star shone through the gap in the maple. If a person had stood there, they might have heard the leaves tell each other, "Tomorrow we try again." Morning would come, and with it more scripture, more tea, more careful steps along the long, bright halls. But for now, the mansion on Peachtree Hill slept, and everyone inside held their own kind of hope, the kind you keep quiet, the kind that grows even when no one watches. The first sounds of morning drifted through the mansion like a soft song, water running through pipes, the distant hum of the coffee maker, a door closing quietly somewhere upstairs. Riley opened her eyes before the alarm could sound. She had always been an early riser. Years of dawn cleaning shifts had made her body an expert at waking before the world. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in her cardigan, and knelt by the window. Outside, the horizon was brushed with pink and gold. A light fog hung above the garden, resting gently on the roses she'd trimmed the day before. She whispered, "Thank you for this morning," then stood, feeling steadier than she had in days. Downstairs, Schuyler was already busy. The kitchen smelled like toast and cinnamon. "You're up early again," she said, pouring batter onto a skillet. "I thought I'd have to drag you out of bed by now." Riley smiled as she washed her hands at the sink. "Can't sleep past sunrise. My mama used to say blessings travel with the morning breeze." Schuyler chuckled. "Then let's catch some." Together they moved in quiet rhythm, Schuyler whisking eggs, Riley slicing fruit, the two of them humming along to the soft gospel playing on the radio. When breakfast was ready, Riley carried the tray upstairs to Mrs. Rowe's room. The older woman was already awake, sitting by the window with her head tilted toward the light. "I heard the birds before the coffee," she said. "That's how I know it's going to be a good day." Riley smiled. "They're singing louder today, Ma'am. Maybe they're showing off." Mrs. Rowe laughed, a sound like wind chimes on a porch. "Then I'll let them win. Read me a verse before we eat, dear. Something bright." Riley opened the Bible and read from Psalm 100. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name. The words rolled softly across the room, filling it with warmth. When she finished, Mrs. Rowe reached out and patted her hand. You remind me that faith can be music, even when the world is quiet. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway. George appeared at the doorway, still in his running clothes, a towel slung around his neck. His face was flushed from exercise, but his eyes were focused, sharp as always. Morning, Mother, he said. His gaze flicked to Riley briefly before resting on his mother. You slept well. Well, enough, Mrs. Rowe said with a smile. The girl keeps me company. She's better than any nurse you've hired. George's lips curved slightly. I can see that. Then, more formally to Riley, he said, I'll need fresh coffee in the office in 15 minutes, please. Yes, sir, she replied. After he left, Mrs. Rowe shook her head. That boy never stops moving. You'd think rest was a sin. Riley chuckled softly. Maybe he's scared of standing still. Maybe he is. Mrs. Rowe agreed. Standing still means listening, and he's not ready to listen yet. Riley found herself repeating those words an hour later as she stood at the counter in the office, setting down a fresh cup of coffee beside George's computer. He sat behind a massive oak desk, eyes fixed on his laptop screen, typing fast and hard. Papers were stacked neatly in front of him, a row of files lined up like soldiers waiting for orders. He didn't look up when he said, Thank you. You're welcome, she replied softly, turning to go. But something made her pause, maybe the tightness in his shoulders or the exhaustion in the slump of his neck. Would you like the window open, sir? It's a pretty morning. George stopped typing. He glanced toward the tall window, where sunlight spilled through sheer curtains. Fine, he said after a moment. A little air might help. She opened the window. A soft breeze entered, carrying the faint scent of fresh-cut grass. He seemed to breathe deeper without realizing it. I'll be outside if you need me, she said quietly. He nodded. You're different from the others. Riley froze. Sir, the others who worked here, they stayed quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was fear. He looked at her finally, his expression unreadable. You're quiet, but it feels steady. Her heart fluttered, though she didn't know why. I just try to do things with care, Mr. Rowe. My mama used to say peace isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of love. He studied her for a beat longer, then turned back to his screen. You may go. Riley left the office, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from something gentler and unfamiliar. Respect, maybe, or understanding, maybe both. By midday, the house came alive. Delivery trucks rumbled down the driveway with supplies for the new housing project George was funding. Skylar directed workers from the porch, clipboard in hand. Riley carried water and sandwiches to the laborers, grateful for the chance to help. One of the workers, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, grinned at her. You work for the big guy, huh? Heard he's got no time for smiles. Riley shrugged with a half-smile. Maybe no one's given him a reason to yet. The man chuckled. Then maybe you'll be the one. She laughed softly but didn't answer. Later that afternoon, she found Mrs. Rowe resting in her chair. You look thoughtful, the older woman said. I was just thinking about people, Riley replied, sitting beside her. Some seem so strong, but they're just tired inside. Mrs. Rowe nodded slowly. Strength and loneliness wear the same coat, child. The trick is learning to tell them apart. They fell into an easy silence, listening to the wind hum against the windows. After a few minutes, Mrs. Rowe spoke again. You have a way of softening things, Riley. Even my son. Don't think I don't notice. I don't do anything special, Riley said quickly. I just try to be kind. That's special enough, Mrs. Rose said with a knowing smile. People like my son live in fortresses. Kindness is the only key that fits the lock. That evening, the mansion's lights glowed golden against the dark sky. Dinner was simple: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, and biscuits. George joined them at the table, though he ate quietly, lost in thought. Skylar kept conversation light, asking about the construction site, the weather, the new volunteers. Riley spoke only when spoken to, but she felt George's gaze flicker toward her once or twice, like a man curious despite himself. After dinner, Mrs. Rowe retired early. Skylar excused herself to the laundry room, leaving Riley to clear the dishes. George lingered by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water. You read to my mother every day? He asked suddenly. Yes, sir. She smiles more now. He paused. Thank you. You don't need to thank me, she said softly. She's the one teaching me. He looked at her again, something almost human in his eyes now, something tired, something sad. My wife used to read to her too, he said quietly, before the sickness took her sight. Riley hesitated. You must miss her. George's jaw tightened. Missing doesn't change what's gone. No, Riley said gently, but remembering can heal what's still here. He looked like he wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, he simply turned toward the stairs. Good night, he said. Good night, sir. When he disappeared down the hallway, Riley leaned against the counter, heart full of something she couldn't name. Maybe pity, maybe understanding, maybe both. Later, in her small room, Riley wrote in her journal, a habit she'd kept since she was a girl. Her handwriting was neat but simple. Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for peace in small things, for kind words, for work that feels right. Please help me be light in this house, even if no one notices. Amen. She closed the notebook and looked out the window. The garden below glimmered in the moonlight, the roses swaying gently in the night breeze. Somewhere in the house, she imagined George sitting alone in his office again, the glow of his lamp, the only light left on. And she prayed, for him, for Mrs. Rowe, for herself, that tomorrow would bring another chance for hope to grow. Morning broke soft and silver over Peachtree Hill. The world outside the mansion was quiet, except for the cooing of doves on the roof and the low hum of city traffic far below. Riley stood by the kitchen sink, her hands in warm water, humming an old hymn her mama used to sing, the kind of tune that sounded like hope whispered under breath. She didn't notice George standing at the doorway until his voice startled her. You sing, he said simply. Riley looked up, startled but smiling. I didn't know anyone was there. I'm sorry, Don't apologize, he said, setting his mug on the counter. The house hasn't sounded that alive in a long time. The compliment, if that's what it was, caught her off guard. Well, sir, I guess I'll take that as a good thing. He gave a small nod. It is. Skylar entered just then, carrying a stack of freshly folded napkins. She eyed George with a knowing look, like a mother bird watching a chick test its wings. Coffee's hot, Mr. Rowe, she said lightly, and you might consider keeping that one around. Her voice could bless a ghost. Riley flushed. Oh, stop. George's lips twitched, almost a smile. We'll see, he said. Good morning, Skylar. Morning, boss, Skylar said, shaking her head as she left. Some sunshine in your kitchen won't kill you. Riley laughed quietly. George only sighed, half amused, half unsure how to respond. Later that morning, Riley tended to Mrs. Rowe, who was sitting beside the window with a crocheted blanket over her knees. I heard my son talking to you, she said, her blind eyes twinkling with mischief. He doesn't talk to most people before his second cup of coffee. He was kind, Riley said softly. Maybe a little grumpy, but kind. Mrs. Rose smiled knowingly. He's more frightened than grumpy, dear. People forget that fear can wear an expensive suit. That made Riley pause. Frightened of what? Losing again, Mrs. Rose said simply. When his wife died, he buried more than his heart. He buried his laughter too. Sometimes I think he buried God. Riley nodded slowly. Maybe God's waiting for him to come dig him back up. Mrs. Rowe chuckled. You've got a way with words, girl. Keep saying them around my son. He needs to hear things that sound like life. The next few days passed in a calm rhythm. Morning prayers, breakfast, reading, tending the garden. The roses had begun to respond to Riley's care, tiny buds showing red and yellow at their tips. Every afternoon she found a few moments to sketch the blooms in her notebook. Sometimes, from his office window, George would catch sight of her outside and pause in his typing, watching her without realizing why. One Thursday, he came down to the garden just as she was putting away her shears. You're turning this place around, he said. Riley looked up, surprised but pleased. The earth just needed someone to listen to it. He stepped closer, folding his hands behind his back. I'm not good at listening, he admitted, to people or dirt. She smiled gently. It's never too late to start. He studied her for a moment, the wind tugging lightly at his sleeve. How old are you, Riley? 28. So young to sound like a preacher. My mama was the preacher, she said with a small laugh. I just borrowed her lessons. He nodded thoughtfully, looking around the garden. She must have been proud of you. Riley's smile faltered. She was. Still is, I hope. He looked at her, realizing too late that he had touched something tender. I didn't mean to. It's all right, she said, quickly blinking away a tear. She's sick, but she's strong. I try to be too. There was a quiet moment between them, just wind and the faint sound of birds in the trees. Then he said, If you ever need anything, you can ask. I'll remember that, she said softly. Thank you. He nodded once, then turned back towards the house, his footsteps slow, thoughtful. That night, Riley's phone rang just as she was folding laundry in her small room. She glanced at the caller ID, St. Anne's Hospital. Her heart dropped. Hello, she said, her voice tight. Miss Caldwell, said a nurse gently. Your mother's condition has worsened. You should come as soon as you can. The world tilted. Riley gripped the edge of the bed for balance. I'll be there, she whispered. Within minutes, she was downstairs, finding Skylar in the kitchen. I need to go, she said breathlessly. My mama, Skylar didn't need more explanation. She took Riley's hand. Go, baby, I'll tell him. Take the car. I can't take his car. Yes, you can, Skylar said firmly. I'll handle him. Riley nodded, grabbed her coat, and ran out into the night. Hours later, the quiet of the hospital room pressed down around her. Machines beeped softly, and her mother's breaths came slow and shallow. Riley held her mother's frail hand, whispering prayers between tears. You can rest, Mama. I'll be okay, I promise. Her mother smiled weakly. You always keep your promises, baby. I love you. Love you more. A moment later, her chest rose one last time, and then didn't. The silence that followed was too big for words. 3 days later, it rained during the funeral. The small church was filled with friends from the shelter, old neighbors, and a few kind faces from her past. Riley sang the hymn her mother loved most, her voice trembling but strong. "It is well with my soul." The song echoed through the hall like a prayer wrapped in sorrow. At the back of the church, unnoticed by most, George stood quietly in a dark coat. He had arrived late, choosing not to disturb her. He didn't know why he had come. He told himself it was out of respect, or duty, or something decent. But when he saw Riley's tear-streaked face as she clung to the casket, he felt something shift deep inside him. A small, sharp ache he hadn't felt in years. After the service, he approached her outside, under the dripping trees. She looked up, startled. "You came," she said softly. "I did," he said simply. "I'm sorry for your loss." She nodded, exhausted. "Thank you. I can cover the hospital bills," he offered quietly. "You shouldn't carry that burden alone." Her expression hardened through the tears. "No, Mr. Rowe. You can't buy grief. Or God." He swallowed, caught off guard by the firmness in her tone. "I appreciate what you've done," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But this is something I have to walk through myself." He opened his mouth to argue, but saw something in her eyes, a quiet strength that made his words fall flat. He nodded slowly. "All right." Riley stepped back, looking at him with a kind sadness. "You've been kind to me and your mama, but I can't come back right now." He hesitated. "You're quitting?" "I'm letting go," she said softly. "I need time to grieve, to remember who I am." He nodded again, eyes dark with something unspoken. "Take all the time you need." She gave a faint, trembling smile. "Goodbye, Mr. Rowe." Then she turned and walked away into the grey rain, her umbrella trembling in her hands. That night, George stood in his office, staring out the tall window at the rain-slicked garden. The roses she had tended bent under the downpour, their petals heavy with water. He set his hand against the glass, watching the drops slide down, merging into one another. Skylar stepped into the room quietly. "She won't be back, will she?" he said without turning. "Maybe not right away," Skylar said gently. "But don't mistake silence for an ending." He closed his eyes, jaw tightening. "She said I can't buy God." Skylar gave a small smile. "She's right." He sighed, the sound weary and raw. "Then what can I do?" "Maybe stop trying to buy things," Skylar said softly. "Start earning them." He turned toward her. "How?" "By living different, by listening." She gestured toward the rain. "Even the sky's trying to tell you something." He looked back outside. The rain eased, leaving a pale reflection of the city lights on the wet leaves. Somewhere in that faint shimmer, he thought of Riley's words, of her mother's quiet faith, of the song she sang through her tears. And for the first time in a long while, George Rowe whispered a prayer, awkward, uncertain, but real. "God," he said under his breath, "if you're still out there, teach me how to listen." The only answer was the soft tap of rain against the window. But somehow, it felt enough. The rain had not stopped for 2 days. It was a steady, soft rain, the kind that seemed to cry for you when you were too tired to do it yourself. The church sat quiet under the grey sky, its steeple half hidden by the low clouds. Inside, rows of wooden pews creaked beneath the weight of friends, neighbors, and strangers who had come to pay respects to a woman they all said the same thing about. She never stopped praying for people. Riley sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap. She wore a simple black dress and no jewelry. Her eyes were swollen, her throat sore from the hymns she had sung the night before at her mother's bedside. The service hadn't even started yet, and already she felt hollowed out, like a house with all the windows open, letting the wind blow through. Carla sat beside her, holding her hand. "You holding up?" she whispered. "I'm trying," Riley said softly. but I don't know what I'm supposed to do next." "Just breathe," Carla said. "That's enough for today." At the back of the church, unnoticed, George Rowe slipped inside. His coat was damp from the rain, his shoes quiet on the floorboards. He took a seat near the back, away from the crowd. He wasn't sure what made him come. He told himself it was out of respect, out of decency. But deep down, he knew there was more to it. Something about Riley's absence from the mansion had made the house colder, emptier, as if she had taken the light with her when she left. The organ began to play softly, and everyone stood. The pastor's voice filled the room, calm and kind. "Today we remember a woman who gave more than she had, and loved deeper than most people ever dare." As the pastor spoke, Riley listened but didn't hear. Her mind wandered through memories, the smell of her mama's cooking, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hands when she prayed over Riley as a little girl. Each memory was a thread, pulling her between joy and pain. When it came time to sing, she rose to her feet. Her voice was weak at first, but when she began the old hymn, "It is well with my soul," something inside her steadied. Her tone grew clear, rich, and full of faith. The congregation joined her softly, and even George, sitting in the back, felt his throat tighten. He bowed his head, ashamed that he had come expecting to stay untouched. When the song ended, the pastor stepped forward again. "Her daughter wishes to say a few words." Riley walked slowly to the pulpit, hands shaking as she held a small, folded paper. She looked out at the sea of faces and swallowed hard. "My mama didn't have much," she began, "but what she did have, she gave away. To her neighbors, to the church, to anyone who needed it. She used to say, 'Riley, love isn't something you keep. It's something you give until it hurts.'" Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "She taught me how to love when it was hard, and she taught me to trust God even when I couldn't see a way forward." Her eyes lifted, tears glistening. "I don't understand why she had to go, but I know she's not hurting anymore, and I know she'd tell me to stand tall, smile, and keep helping people who've lost their way." She paused, voice breaking. "So I will." A quiet murmur of "Amen" rippled through the crowd. Riley folded her paper, stepped down, and returned to her seat. Carla put an arm around her, and they sat in silence as the service ended. Outside, under the grey sky, people gathered with umbrellas, hugging, offering soft words that didn't help but came from good hearts. Riley stood by the grave, her hand resting on the wet wood of the casket. Raindrops mingled with her tears. "Goodbye, Mama," she whispered. "You did your job. I'll try to do mine." When she turned, she froze. George stood a few feet away, rain dripping from his coat collar, his eyes steady but gentle. He gave a small nod. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Thank you," she managed. "I didn't want to intrude," he said. "I just wanted to be here." She nodded, eyes red. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said, "but I needed to." For a moment they stood there in silence, rain pattering on the ground between them. Then he said, "I can take care of the hospital bills. It's the least I can do." Riley's expression hardened slightly, not out of anger, but conviction. "No," she said softly. "You've done enough." "Riley," she shook her head. "You can't buy grief, Mr. Rowe, or peace, or God." Her voice cracked, but she held her chin up. "And I think that's what you've been trying to do." He stared at her, the words hitting harder than he expected. He wanted to argue but couldn't. Instead, he nodded once. "You're right." She looked at him for a long moment, sadness and compassion mixed in her gaze. "You've been kind," she said gently, "but I need time. Time to remember who I am. Time to find my faith again." He wanted to say something, anything, but the right words wouldn't come. Finally, he said the only thing that felt true. "Take all the time you need." She gave a small, broken smile. "Goodbye, Mr. Rowe." And with that, she turned and walked away, the black umbrella trembling slightly in her hands. He watched her go until she disappeared into the grey crowd. Then he exhaled slowly, realizing that her words had left something behind, a crack in the stone wall he had built around himself. That evening, back at the mansion, Schuyler found George standing by the window in his office, staring out at the rain-soaked garden. The lights were dim, and the house felt emptier than it ever had. "She's gone, isn't she?" Schuyler said quietly. He didn't turn. "Yes. You're going to let her go for good?" He was silent for a long time. "She said I can't buy God." Schuyler smiled sadly. "She's a smart girl." He rubbed his temples. "She's more than that." "Then prove it," Schuyler said softly. "Stop trying to buy things. Start earning them." He turned toward her, his expression raw. "How? I've built buildings, businesses, empires. I don't know how to build people." "Then start small," she said. "Build kindness, build trust, build a reason to believe again." He looked back out the window, where the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. The roses outside were bent, but still standing. "Maybe," he said quietly. "I can start with the garden." Schuyler nodded. Good place to start. When she left him alone, George stood there for a long time. The city lights flickered below, and the sound of rain faded into the hum of night. He closed his eyes, remembering Riley's voice in the garden, the calm way she'd said, "It's never too late to start." He didn't know if he believed it yet, but for the first time in years he wanted to. He sank into his chair and whispered into the quiet, "If you're real, God, show me how." No thunder answered. No miracle burst through the clouds. Just the steady sound of rain, soft and faithful, falling on the house she had left behind. In the days after the funeral, the rain finally stopped. The city dried slowly, like a face after tears. Sunlight returned, first weak and thin, then stronger. The mansion on Peachtree Hill stood quiet. Breakfast trays came and went. Mrs. Rowe still asked for scripture each morning. Schuyler kept the house steady, but without Riley the rooms felt larger, the halls longer, the pauses heavier. Even the garden seemed to wait. George went back to work like a man who feared stillness. He woke early, ran hard, and filled his hours with meetings. He visited sites, checked numbers, and signed stacks of papers. Yet each night, when he set his phone down, the silence pressed on him. He would look toward the garden and remember the way Riley had crouched by the roses, gentle hands freeing tangled stems. He remembered the sound of her voice when she read to his mother, warm, calm, like sunlight on a winter floor. One morning, he stood at the tall office window, hands in his pockets, watching the city wake. He had a meeting near the edge of town to walk an old building he planned to buy and turn into luxury lofts. The deal was good. The profit would be clean and quick, but the idea felt thin, like a suit that no longer fit. He picked up the phone and dialed a different number instead. "Darren," he said when his project manager answered. "Pull the files on the Eastgate complex, the one by the old bus depot. The numbers don't work for high-end. I want a new plan." "What kind of plan?" Darren asked. George looked at the garden, at the bench, at the wet stones where sunlight had begun to pool. "Housing," he said. "Affordable, safe, clean. I want families in there, women with children, people coming out of shelters." There was a long pause on the line. "That's new," Darren said slowly. "Can we talk cost?" "We'll make it work," George said. "It doesn't have to turn gold. It has to turn lives." Another pause. Darren cleared his throat. "All right, sir. I'll meet you at the site at noon." "Make it 11," George said. And bring the structural reports. We're not going to polish a ruin. We're going to rebuild." He hung up and stood very still. The word rebuild hung in the air and then settled inside him as if it had found a home. 2 weeks passed like this. Meetings, site visits, new drawings spread across long tables. He sat with architects and argued for more windows, more light, more community space. He asked for laundry rooms on each floor and a small play area in the courtyard. He ordered long tables for a future community kitchen and wrote a note to himself that simply said, "Hire councillors." When someone asked why, he surprised himself by saying, "Because roofs alone don't fix storms." On a grey Friday, after walking the Eastgate site with Darren and the city inspector, George drove alone to the outskirts for one more pass at a different property, a run-down strip of buildings near the highway. He had looked at it months ago and said no. Today he wanted to see it again. The road there curved past a motel that had seen better years. The paint peeled. The ice machine rattled. A neon vacancy sign flickered like a tired eye. He slowed at a red light. A woman in a faded uniform pushed a cart across the second-floor walkway, lifting heavy bags of laundry into a bin. She wore no jacket against the wind. Her head was bent, but the way she moved, careful, steady, like she handled fragile things, caught him. The light turned green. He should have driven on. He did not. He pulled into the lot and parked under a bent lamp. For a moment he only watched her. She knocked on a door, called housekeeping, then pushed the cart inside. A few minutes later she came back out, dragging 2 bags, and turned her face toward the parking lot. His breath caught. Riley. He got out of the car before he could talk himself back into leaving. Gravel crunched under his shoes. She didn't see him until he was halfway across the lot. When she did, she froze. Her hands tightened on the cart handle. He stopped several feet away, leaving the space between them like a small field where words might grow or die. "Hello," he said, voice low. "Mr. Rowe." Her voice held surprise and a wall. She glanced toward the office, toward the other rooms, and back to him. "You shouldn't be here." He nodded once. "You're right, and yet here I am." She looked tired, not the kind of tired a full night's sleep could fix. Her uniform was clean but thin. A pen was tucked behind her ear. A folded paper stuck out of her apron pocket, probably a list of rooms. "Are you—" he began, then stopped. He didn't know how to ask, "Are you okay?" without sounding like he wanted to fix it. "How long have you been working here?" "A week," she said. "Maybe 8 days. Time feels strange in places like this." He followed her eyes to the long walkway, to the doors with chipped numbers. A woman in a hoodie carried ice to a room. A little boy sat on the steps with a plastic car, making small engine sounds under his breath. "I didn't come to pity you," he said. "I came to ask for help." She blinked. The wall in her gaze cracked but did not fall. "Help with what?" He told her. Not fast, not slick, plain and simple. About Eastgate, about the families, about the plans to rebuild, about laundry rooms and sunlight, about councillors, about kitchens, about a courtyard where a kid might learn to run without fear. He told her he was tired of making money that could not make a person whole. "It sounds good," she said when he finished. She was breathing a little faster now, hope rising in her like warm air. "But who runs it?" "You do," he said. She laughed once, short and sharp. "No, sir. I clean rooms." "You build trust," he said. "You manage chaos. You read a room and calm it. You led my mother back to laughter. That's project leadership." She shook her head. "I'm not a director. I don't know the first thing about permits and codes." "You know the first thing about people," he said. "I have managers for codes. I need you for hearts." She stared at him, and for a second an old ache passed through her eyes. Grief first, then pride, then fear. "Is this guilt?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "About the bills? About the funeral?" "No," he said. He would not look away. "This is change." A door opened. A woman in a maid uniform stepped out and glanced between them. Riley gave a quick nod that said it's fine, and the woman moved on. "Pray about it," he said. The words surprised them both. "Or think about it. Or sit with it. But please, don't say no because you're scared." She pressed her lips together. His gentleness dismantled her anger faster than his money ever could. "I don't make big choices fast," she said at last. "I don't either anymore," he replied. "Take your time, I'll wait." "How would I reach you?" she asked. "Call Skylar," he said. "She'll get me." At the sound of Skylar's name, some tension left her shoulders. She nodded. "All right." He dipped his head once, a small bow, a thank you, maybe both, then walked back to his car. At the door he turned and said, "You don't have to save me to say yes, just help me save them." She watched him drive away. The neon sign blinked twice and settled back to its slow blink. She touched the pen behind her ear, then pulled out the folded paper and wrote a single word on the margin. Eastgate. That night, after her shift, after she walked the bus route back to the small room she rented behind a church, after she checked the 2 messages on her old phone, one from Carla, one from the shelter director thanking her for dropping off blankets, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. A church bell across the street chimed 9. She laced her fingers and rested her forehead on them. "God," she whispered, "I don't want to make a mistake because I'm tired. If this is pride, take it. If this is fear, name it. If this is you, clear the road." When she lifted her head, nothing magical had happened. No wind shook the window. No light filled the room. But a calm rose in her chest like warm water. She reached for her phone and scrolled to a name she trusted. "Skylar," she said when the call connected. "Baby," Skylar answered, relief flooding her tone. "I've been praying you'd call." "Did he send you?" Riley asked. "Lord, no," Skylar said. "I sent myself. I was going to call tonight anyway. I thought I'd try again in an hour." They both laughed, and the laugh sounded like a bridge. "He came to see me," Riley said. "At the motel." "I know," Skylar said. "He told me he hoped he didn't mess it up. What do you think?" Riley's voice softened. "Is he different?" "Yes," Skylar said, simple and sure. "He's softer. Scared, but softer. He's been changing plans. He's been listening more. He walks around like the ground might talk if he slows down." "Can I trust him?" Riley asked. The question was not about money or hours. It was about heart. "You can trust what he's building right now," Skylar said. "And you can trust me to stand between you and any sharp edges." Riley exhaled. "He wants me to run the project." "I know," Skylar said, a smile in her voice. "I told him you were already running most hearts in a 3-mile radius." "I've never done anything like this," Riley said, the panic rising now that the idea was real enough to hold. "What if I fail? What if they need more than I have?" "They will," Skylar said. "And then God will show up with the rest." Silence held them for a moment. It was not empty. It was steady, like a hand on a shoulder. "I'll meet you tomorrow," Skylar said. "He'll be at the site in the afternoon. Come see. Don't promise. Just walk the ground." "All right," Riley said. "Tomorrow." The next day was clear and cool. Riley woke before dawn, braided her hair, and put on clean jeans and a plain sweater. She packed a peanut butter sandwich and an apple into a brown bag. On the bus, she watched the city slide by. Brick schools, corner stores, murals with bright faces. She felt small and large at the same time, like a seed that knew it could become a tree. Skylar waited for her at the corner by the old bus depot. She wore a denim jacket and held a thermos. "Hot chocolate," she said, pressing it into Riley's hands. "Coffee lies. Hot chocolate tells the truth." They stood together and looked at the Eastgate complex. It was a long, low curve of buildings wrapped around a cracked courtyard. Windows were broken and boarded. The grass had turned to patches of dirt. A swing set leaned like a tired man. But Riley could see, even from the sidewalk, where light would fall if the windows were clean. She could imagine children's voices stitching across the space. "Walk it," Skylar said. "See if it speaks." They went through the chain-link gate and stepped onto the courtyard concrete. A crew was already there, 2 architects with clipboards, a young woman measuring doorways, a foreman pointing at a beam. George stood near the center of the yard in a flannel shirt and work boots, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked like a man who had remembered he had hands. He saw them and came over, not fast, not slow. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I'm only looking," Riley said. "Looking is step 1. He replied. He led them through the first building. The hall smelled like dust and old smoke. He pointed to rooms and spoke in clear, simple lines. 2-bedroom here. We'll widen doorways, safety bars in bathrooms, windows to the courtyard so parents can watch kids from the kitchen sink, laundry at the end of each hall, community room on the ground floor with tables and a small library." He paused. No TVs in the community room, books, puzzles, people. He took them to the stairwell. Fresh paint, good lights, cameras for safety but not to scare. Staff on site 24 hours, not guards, guides. We hire from the community, we train. They walked outside to the courtyard. He stopped at the broken swing set and touched the rusted chain. "New swings," he said. "And a small garden, not fancy, just tomatoes and herbs. People feel different when they grow things." Riley looked at the chain. She imagined little hands grabbing on, feet pumping, a laugh thrown high into the air. She swallowed. "We're calling it Haven," he said, "unless you have a better name." She shook her head. "Haven is good." "You would have control of operations," he said. "Not alone. No one can carry that alone. But you would set the tone. You'd build the program. You'd sit with the people who come through the door and ask them what they really need. And then we'd try to give that." "What if what they need is a thing we don't have?" she asked. "Then we find it," he said. "Or we build it." They stood in a grey patch of sunlight and listened to a saw start up 2 buildings over. Riley held the thermos with both hands. "And if this fails?" she asked quietly. "Then we learn," he said. "We fail forward, but we won't quit." She stared at him for a long moment. He didn't fidget under her gaze. He didn't try to sweeten the air with extra promises. He just stood there, steady, like a post set deep. "Okay," she said at last. Her voice surprised her. It sounded like someone who had chosen a road, not someone who had been pushed down one. "I'll try." Relief flickered across his face. Not victory. Relief. "Thank you. I need a month-to-month at first," she said quickly, practical now that the hard yes had been spoken. "I want a probation period. I want a say in the people we hire, and I want someone to sit with me when I don't know what to do." "You have all of that," he said. "And you have Skylar whenever you need her." "I already knew that part," Riley said, and Skylar squeezed her arm. "Come at sunset," George said. "When the crews clear out, I want you to see the light on these bricks. It might help you dream." She went back to the motel long enough to turn in her apron. She told the manager she had been offered a job at a housing project. The manager stared at her like she had spoken another language, then said, "Good for you. Come by for a reference if you need one. Riley thanked her and went to her small room to pack her few items into a tote. 3 shirts, a Bible, a sketchbook, and the photo of her mother in a frame made from glued shells. By late afternoon, she returned to Eastgate. The crews had gone. Dust lay like flour on the steps. The air had cooled, and the sky wore the kind of blue that made you want to breathe deeper. George waited near the courtyard, hands in his pockets, looking at the buildings as if they were speaking, and he didn't want to miss a word. "You came," he said. "I said I would," she replied. They walked the curve of the courtyard slowly. The sun slid lower and warmed the brick until it looked almost soft. Shadows fell long from the few trees that still stood. A stray cat stepped out from under a bench, considered them, and moved on. "Why this?" she asked, nodding at the buildings. "You could have kept doing what you know. What pays?" "I was tired of spending myself on empty," he said. "And because of you." She glanced at him. "Because of me?" "You said I couldn't buy God," he said. It felt like an insult. It was a mercy. It broke something that needed breaking. They reached the center, where the ground dipped and rain had left a shallow, dry-edged pool. He stopped there. She did too. "My wife used to talk about places like this," he said. "She wanted me to build one. I told her we'd get to it when the market was right." He let out a breath that sounded like regret turned into air. "The market never became more right than my pride was wrong." Riley said nothing. Some confessions did not need answers. They needed witnesses. He straightened and looked at her. "Will you walk this with me? Not just today. Not just until the ribbon cutting." He shook his head. "I don't even want a ribbon. I want keys in hands." She looked at the bricks, the beams, the broken swing. She looked at the sky holding the last bright line of day. She thought of her mother's voice. Stand tall, smile, help people who've lost their way. She felt the weight of fear and the greater weight of calling. Then she nodded. "I'll walk it," she said. "And when I can't, I'll sit. And when I can't sit, I'll pray. But I won't quit. Neither will I," he said. They stood without speaking as the sun slipped and the first streetlights flickered on. The courtyard shifted from gold to blue. A wind rose and moved a paper across the concrete with a dry whisper. The broken swing creaked once, like it remembered the sound of laughter, and was trying to make it on its own. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she echoed. They left by the gate and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city exhaled around them, cars, voices, a bus pulling up with a sigh. They did not touch. They did not make promises too big for the day to hold. They only walked side by side for a half block, then stopped at the corner where paths parted. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He went one way. She went the other, carrying the light of the last line of sunset inside her like a small, sure flame. And for the first time since the hospital room, she felt something close to joy. Not loud, not wild, but sturdy, like a handhold on a steep hill. Back at the mansion, Schuyler set 2 mugs on the counter and smiled into the quiet kitchen. "Thank you," she said to the room and to God, "for small good things that become big ones." Upstairs, Mrs. Rose slept with the daisy vase on her nightstand and a psalm folded beneath it. In the office, the photograph on George's desk caught a sliver of moonlight. In her rented room, Riley taped her mother's shell frame above the bed and wrote 3 words on a scrap of paper. "We build Haven." She set the paper on the pillow and turned off the light. Outside, the city kept breathing. And somewhere in the old bones of Eastgate, a future began to stir. Morning sun poured through the half-cleaned windows at Haven, turning dust into gold in the air. The place smelled of paint and new lumber, of sweat and possibility. Riley stood in the courtyard with a clipboard Skylar had handed her, half amused that anyone trusted her with one. She wore old jeans, a t-shirt, and sneakers splattered with primer. Around her, the buzz of saws and hammer taps mixed with laughter. For the first time in months, the noise in her ears wasn't grief. It was life being built. George walked up carrying 2 cups of coffee. He had traded his suits for a flannel shirt and work boots. He looked younger without the armor of formality. Though the weight in his eyes hadn't vanished, he handed her a cup. 2 sugars, he said. You remembered? She smiled. I forget a lot of things lately. I'm trying not to forget the right ones. They walked through the first floor together. She checked the volunteer's sign-in sheet. He asked questions about supply orders and blueprints. When a nail gun jammed, he knelt to fix it himself. Riley watched, surprised at how naturally. He worked beside the crew instead of above them. It wasn't a show, it was a man learning how to serve. At lunch, everyone gathered in the empty community room, sitting on overturned buckets and boards. Skylar passed out sandwiches and apples. One of the volunteers, a young mother from the shelter, asked George why a billionaire cared about a broken neighborhood. He didn't give a speech. He just said, "Because broken neighborhoods are full of people. And I finally figured out people are worth more than profit." The words hung in the air like a small gospel. Riley met his eyes and saw the truth in them. As weeks passed, Haven began to take shape. Windows gleamed. Fresh paint covered the scars on the walls. Children's drawings, houses, hearts, stick figures holding hands started to appear on the bulletin board near the entrance. Riley managed schedules, fielded questions, and soothed tempers when the crew grew tired. She learned to read blueprints, to order supplies, to negotiate gently but firmly with vendors who tried to overcharge. At night, she stayed late, sweeping floors, humming to herself. One evening, a thunderstorm rolled in fast. Power flickered and went out just as the last crew left. Riley grabbed a flashlight and started checking rooms. She found George in the office, hunched over papers by the light of his phone. Rain lashed against the windows. "You should head home before it gets worse," she said. "I'll stay until the generator's up." He replied. "I'll stay too," she said. "2 heads can trip the same fuse." They laughed. The power stayed out. The thunder rolled closer. She found candles in a box and lit them, setting 3 on the floor between them. The small light made their shadows stretch up the walls. For a while they worked in quiet, checking wiring diagrams, marking spots that needed repair. The candlelight made his face look softer, almost peaceful. After a long silence, he said, "My wife hated storms. She said thunder was God reminding us he's bigger than we think. I used to laugh at that." Riley looked at him. "Do you still laugh?" "No?" he said. "Now I listen." She nodded. "Maybe that's the start of believing again." He smiled faintly. "You sound like my mother." "That's a compliment," she said. "She's got wisdom tucked in every wrinkle." The storm eased. In the warm, flickering light, he looked at her and said, "You know, when you left, I thought I was angry. But it wasn't anger. It was shame. You showed me what faith looks like, and I didn't know how to face it." "You didn't have to face me," she said gently. "You just had to face yourself." "I'm learning," he said. "Good." She whispered, "That's what this place is about, learning how to start again." They sat until the rain slowed and the first hum of the generator filled the building. When the lights blinked back on, she blew out the candles. Neither spoke of the moment, but both carried it like a small flame inside. The next morning, Skylar arrived early and found them already working. She smiled to herself and didn't tease. Mrs. Rowe's health had begun to decline, and Skylar split her time between the mansion and the project. Your mama asked for pictures," she told George, handing him her phone. He scrolled through photos, Riley with volunteers, the new garden beds, the painted walls. His eyes misted. She'd be proud? Skylar said, "She already is." Riley added. He cleared his throat and said, "Let's make sure she lives to see the ribbon cut." By mid-afternoon, the storm clouds were gone, replaced by crisp blue sky. They worked until dusk, painting the last section of wall in the courtyard. George held the ladder. Riley painted a verse above the entrance in simple block letters. "Hope is the light that stays." He read it aloud and nodded. Perfect. As the sun went down, they sat on the steps of the courtyard, watching the colors fade. The city lights flickered in the distance. George passed her a bottle of water. "We're almost there," he said. "We are," she agreed. "And not just with the building." He looked at her then, the evening light soft on his face. "You've changed everything, Riley." She smiled. "No, you just finally let God in." He chuckled. "Maybe so." A breeze lifted her hair, carrying the faint smell of paint and earth. She looked out at the rows of windows catching the last rays of sunset. "This place used to be a ruin," she said quietly. "So was I," he replied. They sat until the lights came on in the courtyard. Somewhere inside the building, a child's laughter echoed, one of the volunteers' sons chasing a ball. Riley smiled. "That's the sound I want to hear here every day." "You will," George said. "We'll make sure of it." They stood and walked toward the gate together. The sky above them turned deep purple, scattered with stars. As they reached the street, Riley looked back once more at Haven, its windows glowing like small hearts in the night. She felt peace settle over her shoulders like a blanket. "Tomorrow," she said softly. "Tomorrow," he echoed, and they parted, each carrying hope that no storm could wash away. By late spring, Haven no longer looked like a construction site. It looked like a home. The scaffolding was gone. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, and flower beds lined the courtyard. New swings swayed gently in the breeze. The smell of clean wood and blooming jasmine filled the air. On the front gate hung a new sign made of polished brass. Haven, a place to begin again. Riley stood at the gate, clipboard in hand, watching a moving truck unload furniture for the last building. She wore jeans streaked with white paint, her hair pulled back, and a smile that reached her eyes. Around her, volunteers hustled to set up rooms. Beds, chairs, kitchen, tables, small touches that turned empty spaces into homes. Skylar arrived carrying a tray of lemonade and paper cups. "They're moving fast," she said with a grin. "You'd think angels were on payroll." Riley laughed. "They are. They just don't know it yet." The sound of footsteps echoed across the courtyard. George came down from the office wing, sleeves rolled up, clipboard tucked under his arm. He had a lightness about him now, a calm Riley hadn't seen before. When he caught her eye, he smiled, small but real. "How's the final count?" he asked. 43 families confirmed," she said proudly. 2 more expected by tomorrow. 45. He repeated the number like a prayer. 45 new beginnings. She nodded. "And not one of them bought with money." "Don't rub it in," he said, half laughing. Skylar handed him a cup of lemonade. "You two make a good team," she said. "Like bricks and mortar." George glanced at Riley. "She's the mortar," he said. "She keeps everything together." Riley shook her head, blushing. "And you're the foundation, sir." He tilted his head. "Only because you rebuilt it." Skylar chuckled. "All right, before this turns into a sermon, both of you get ready. The press will be here in an hour." "The press?" Riley asked, startled. It's just a small piece, George said quickly. A local paper wanted to cover Haven's opening. I'm not good with cameras, she said nervously. He smiled. Just be yourself. That's all anyone needs to see. When the reporter arrived, the courtyard buzzed with activity. The children of new residents played tag around the swings. Volunteers arranged flowers near the benches. Riley stood beside George as the reporter asked questions. What inspired this project? The reporter asked. George glanced at Riley before answering. A woman who believed faith could do what money couldn't, he said. She reminded me that broken things aren't useless. They're just waiting to be cared for. The reporter smiled, jotting notes. And who is this woman? George gestured toward Riley. She's the heart of Haven. None of this would exist without her. The words hit her harder than applause. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Cameras flashed. She blinked through the brightness, offering a quiet smile. The reporter thanked them, shook hands, and left to interview a few families. When the courtyard finally emptied, Riley turned to George. You didn't have to say that. I did, he said simply, because it's true. She hesitated. You've changed, Mr. Rowe. He smiled faintly. Call me George. I think I've earned at least a first name by now. Okay, George. It felt strange on her tongue, but right in her heart. They walked slowly through the courtyard. Sunlight gleamed on the new windows, and laughter drifted from the play area. A young mother sat under the awning, rocking her baby. Nearby, two boys argued over a ball, then dissolved into giggles. Riley stopped to watch. That sound, she said softly. It's what I dreamed about. George nodded. The sound of second chances. They stood together for a moment, just watching life unfold. Then Schuyler's voice carried across the courtyard. Lunchtime, y'all. Come eat before everything gets cold. George and Riley joined the others at a long wooden table set up under a tent. Sandwiches, fruit, lemonade, and a big chocolate cake that Schuyler claimed was her ribbon-cutting miracle. She made George slice the first piece and Riley serve it. Cameras clicked again, but this time no one minded. After the crowd ate and drifted away, Riley lingered behind, picking up paper cups and napkins. The air had turned golden. She looked up at the old iron swing set, now freshly painted, children still laughing as it creaked gently in rhythm. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly at peace. George came up behind her quietly. You did it, he said. She smiled. We did it? He studied her for a moment. You could go anywhere now, you know. You could do anything. She shook her head. I think I'm right where I belong. He looked down, then said softly, So am I. The words hung between them, simple, unforced, and full of meaning neither dared to name. That evening, after the last family had gone to their new rooms, the three of them, George, Riley, and Schuyler, sat on the patio steps watching the city lights flicker on below. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. You know, Schuyler said, when this started, I prayed God would give this place a soul. I didn't expect he'd give it 3. Riley laughed softly. We just followed his breadcrumbs. George nodded. And somehow they led us here. A moment of quiet passed. Then Schuyler stood and stretched. Well, my knees are done. You two close up the gates. I'm going home to soak in Epsom salt in gratitude. She squeezed Riley's shoulder. Don't stay too late, sweetheart. When Schuyler left, the courtyard grew still except for the rustle of leaves. The glow of the lamplight cast soft halos around them. Riley turned to George. Do you ever think about what's next? Every day, he said, but for once I'm not rushing to find the answer. She nodded. That's a good place to be. He smiled faintly. You taught me that too. She looked away, embarrassed but touched. You give me too much credit. He shook his head. No, Riley, I don't give you enough. A long pause followed. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter floated out a window. It faded into the night like a blessing. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For listening, she said. You didn't used to. He laughed quietly. And you didn't used to talk this much. They both smiled, easy and warm. As the first stars appeared, Riley stood and brushed off her jeans. Tomorrow we start the next phase, she said. What's that? He asked. Teaching the families to grow their own garden. She said. You can't have Haven without roots. I'll be there, he said. I know. They walked toward the gate together, their steps slow and sure. The world around them shimmered in soft starlight. Riley glanced back once at the building, the lights glowing gently in the windows like candles in a cathedral. Looks like a light on the hill, she murmured. George followed her gaze. It is, he said, and it's just the beginning. As they walked down the path, their shadows stretched long behind them, merging with the soft golden glow spilling out from Haven's windows, proof that even from the darkest places, light could rise again. The morning after the grand opening, headlines hit the news like stones in calm water. Billionaire falls for his maid. Charity project a publicity scam. The words flashed across every screen, paired with a photo of George and Riley laughing beside the swings. The article twisted kindness into manipulation, painting Haven as a ploy for redemption and Riley as a woman who'd played the sympathy card. Riley froze when she saw it on her phone. Her heart dropped, her hands trembling. Around her, workers whispered. Volunteers stared. The joy that had filled Haven only hours earlier turned to thick, uneasy silence. Skylar stormed into George's office, newspaper in hand. This is filth, she said. You need to shut this down. I'm trying, George said, his voice low but tight. Lawyers are on it. The story came from Daniel Kessler, my old partner. He's been waiting for this. Downstairs, Riley faced the women from the shelter, who now looked at her with uncertainty. I swear, none of it's true, she said softly. This place is real. But she could see the doubt in their eyes. By evening, donors began pulling funding. 2 contracts were cancelled. The phone rang non-stop. George stayed late, answering every call, his voice hoarse, his patience fraying. When Riley came to the door, he looked up with tired eyes. They want you to resign, he said. She stepped closer. Then I will. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her voice broke. If staying hurts this place, I'll leave. He stood abruptly. I built this with you. And now you'll have to keep it standing without me. She whispered. That's what faith is. Trusting that good work survives even when you're gone. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She reached out, touched his hand briefly, then turned to leave. He watched her walk down the hall, past the mural that read, Hope is the light that stays. That night, George sat alone in the empty courtyard. The lights glowed faintly across the wet pavement. He remembered her voice, her laughter, the way she'd knelt in the garden months ago, whispering to the soil like it could heal. Now it was his turn to whisper. Don't let me fail her, God. He said into the night. Not again. Only the wind answered, soft, steady, carrying the faint scent of roses she had planted. Months passed. Haven survived, but barely. Donations slowed, projects paused, and George poured his savings into keeping the lights on. He moved into one of the empty units, trading his penthouse for a small room with a creaky bed and a single lamp. The mansion stood dark now. His mother had passed peacefully, and Schuyler divided her time between helping at the shelter and tending the gravesite. Each night George worked in the courtyard, sweeping, fixing, and praying. Sometimes he heard echoes of Riley's laughter in the halls and wondered if Grace could still find him. One rainy evening, while serving dinner in the community kitchen, he heard a voice behind him. Soft, familiar, steady. "Need a hand?" He turned. Riley stood there, hair damp from the rain, apron in her hand. She looked stronger somehow, older in spirit, lighter in heart. For a moment he couldn't speak. "I heard Haven was still standing," she said gently. "Thought maybe I could help hold it up." His voice cracked. "You don't know how many nights I prayed you'd walk through that door." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I heard them." They worked side by side, serving soup, wiping tables, washing dishes. Between them, words weren't needed, just the rhythm of service, of grace rediscovered. When the last guest left, George turned to her. "You were right. I couldn't buy peace. I couldn't buy God." Riley met his eyes. "You didn't have to. He was waiting for you to give yourself instead." He knelt suddenly. Not in romance, but repentance. "Riley, I'm sorry for all of it, for the pride, the blindness, the hurt." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already made it right. Look around. Haven's still breathing." Tears filled his eyes. "Not because of me, because of you. Because of us," she corrected softly. The rain eased outside. Moonlight poured through the window, casting silver across the floor. They bowed their heads together, silent, humbled, grateful. A year later, Haven thrived again. New families, laughter, gardens blooming. At the front desk hung a framed photo, Riley and George at the first anniversary, holding hands over the plaque that read, "From servitude to service." One afternoon, a little girl tugged Riley's apron. "Miss Riley, is it true you were once sold at an auction?" Riley smiled, kneeling beside her. "No, sweetheart, I was found." George, standing nearby, smiled too, and as sunlight filled the room, the air seemed to whisper the truth of it. Grace always finds a way home. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.